next speaker is Kevin Hewitt, who is a law and justice major here at Rowan, and he's also an ethics minor. He will be presenting his work entitled Human Trafficking, A Stark Conversation. Thanks, Kevin.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for coming here. This has been a subject that I've put much research into at my time here at Rowan University, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to present this information to you. Now, when we think of human trafficking, we might think of that one incident around spring 2018 semester where there were people who claimed to be part of a church organization luring people away from campus. Well, I can assure you that's happening more and more every day because human trafficking is modern slavery. And when we think of slavery, we used to think of the atrocities that our nation has committed, the African American community, and the 4-year Civil War that nearly tore our country apart and finally ended slavery for what we thought was once and for all. Only if that were the case. 20 million people that we presume are in chains today, 67.9% of those people, which is about 14.2 million, are used for forced labor exploitation. 21.5% of that, or roughly 4.5 million, is used for forced sexual exploitation, and 10.5%, or 2.2 million people, are used in state-imposed labor camps. To put that in perspective, that's about 4 million people shy of being the equivalent to the population of Australia, a country and a continent. So what are the stakes here? Well, first, to understand the stakes, I feel like we have to understand the history. Human trafficking is one of the world's oldest institutions, beginning from the very dawn of civilization and reaching every civilization known to humanity. Every monotheistic and polytheistic religion has mentioned slavery or even tolerated slavery in it itself. And so, to understand more, we have to look at the practice. Human trafficking is one of the world's most profitable aspects of the black market, being a $150 billion industry a year, eclipsing many corporations like Exxon, Coca-Cola, and Ford. It is the third largest dark industry behind counterfeiting and the drug trade, respectively. As we know of, anywhere from 800,000 to 4 million people are trafficked each year. For sexual exploitation, which is 66% of the profits made from this $150 billion industry, that would be the equivalent of $99 billion every year. With forced labor making up 28.7% of the profits, that's around $4.32 billion every year. And for domestic servitude, which is only coming in at measly 3%, that is still bringing in $8 billion every single year. And New Jersey is especially a target. So why New Jersey? Well, first, we have to look at our state. Being of 9 million strong, New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the United States. Our population density is that equivalent to China and India. We are also a very diverse state, which human traffickers love because they enjoy picking people of their own ethnicity. And as Assistant Attorney General Tracy M. Thompson to the Christie administration stated, there are more slaves now than there were in 1864, and it is only going to get worse. So who's affected? Everyone. While only 2% of men are used for the most profitable aspect of human trafficking, it still only makes up 20% of the people who are trafficked every year. So when you look at how 60% of all men are being trafficked, it evens out pretty equally. With the growing population of the state of New Jersey and the allowance for us to be a sanctuary state, allowing people to come in undocumented, this is creating a problem for the people who come here undocumented because it hardens their efforts to become part of the communities they live in and seek help from the police that should be there to provide help for them. Undocumented immigrants can be taken from highways, truck stops, or anywhere and be abducted without leaving a trace. Now let's discuss the ethical theories that I have found to be applicable. At first, I'd like to begin with deontology. Now, as many of you know, deontology and Immanuel Kant, some of the things that he has stood for and has said over the years have not aged too well, but I feel that what he says is still of value to us. He allows for he says we should have strict moral guidelines for ourselves and to promote universal happiness. I feel the categorical imperative emphasizes this consistency like no other ethical theory should. What's gravitated me towards the categorical imperative is what I think can be seen as the golden rule. Act as to treat humanity, whether in thine own person or that of any other, in every case as an end withal, never as a means only. I feel this is very important because I feel like it truly makes us look at humans as humans, because we are truly all the same and we are part of the human race. I like to put the emphasis on the fourth principle: if everyone does not also endeavor, as far as in him lies, to forward the ends of others, for the ends of any subject which is an end in himself, ought as far as possible to be my ends, also that conception is to have its full effect with me. So I feel that the categorical imperative allows us to have strict moral guidelines for not only how we treat ourselves in this country, but how we can deal with the human trafficking problem domestically and globally. Next, I'd like to talk about utilitarianism and its greatest happiness principle. As many people in this room know Peter Singer, teaching out of Princeton University, he does have a solution for human trafficking, although some people might not be comfortable with that idea. Peter Singer is a great advocate for the legalization of prostitution. And as we've been able to monitor in Nevada, there are aspects of prostitution that are more beneficial than not. And allowing for prostitution to be legalized means that we can monitor what is exactly happening with the people going into this profession, and we can directly compete with the most profitable aspect of this dark industry. When we try and ban institutions like sex trafficking, we can reference our past in banning things like prohibition and the war on drugs, which has created some of the most profitable aspects of the dark industry next to human trafficking. Last and certainly not least, I wanted to ensure that I be able to discuss feminist theory. Feminist theory is a reaction to deontology, utilitarianism, and the social construct, and it is an attempt to revise, reformulate, and rethink traditional ethics, and to the extent that it deprives and devalues women's moral experience. I've been able to find many feminists, thanks to Professor Miller, who are gathering and providing information on human trafficking and how to solve and combat these issues. Three of these women, and forgive me if I mispronunciate their names, but Cynthia L. Wolkin is a leading feminist in legal theory and how we can revitalize and rethink legislature and providing a new framework for our justice system. Diana Tatchins-Myers talks about and discusses autonomy and paternalism on how some of the women in the sex trade might not even want to leave, and how to keep the ones that do from going back into human trafficking, because human trafficking does have high recidivism rates. Of course, Jennifer K. Lobels discusses border security and rethinking how to fight human trafficking in the U.S. and worldwide. So why aren't we talking about this more? As many of you know, this is the least discussed bipartisan issue that we're grappling with today. Both former President Barack Obama and Donald Trump have had human trafficking on their agendas and supported and passed legislation to help human trafficking victims and combat the institution in America. And yet everyone is still a target. But just because no one's talking about it doesn't mean there still aren't solutions. If we focus on incentivizing citizenship for undocumented immigrants in order to allow themselves to web themselves into the community and be able to trust the police officers and other local and elected officials to help them, then we will be united as one fighting these human traffickers that are preying on our disparaged communities. Ending the opioid epidemic in New Jersey would be greatly beneficial because many people turn to a life of poverty and have to sell themselves to this industry, or when they are abducted, they become addicted to opioids so they can be more dependent on their captors. We should also be monitoring and discussing options on how to handle prostitution in the state of New Jersey. Just because it does work in Nevada doesn't mean that it will work the same way in New Jersey, and I feel that we should at least give it the chance to discuss how we can implement it if we can. Enhancing community policing might be one of the most important things on this list because, as many of us know, many communities in the state of New Jersey and across the nation do not trust the police departments. Many people have justified reasons for doing so, but in order for the police to be effective, there must be a bond between the community and the police. And of course, situational crime prevention. Putting up more security cameras on highways and truck stops where we are suspecting human trafficking victims from abducting people would be greatly beneficial in order to prevent them from doing it on the scale that we know of right now. But who's leading the fight on social media? Well, as many of you may know, Ashton Kutcher from That 70s Show as Kelso, he and Debbie Moore have created a nonprofit organization that's developed software to help police find child sex trafficking victims at a faster rate. To this day, if you've checked Thorne's, well, of course Thorne is the name of the nonprofit, Thorne's Instagram page has proudly announced that they have saved over 10,081 children from being abducted into human trafficking. To put that into perspective, that's about half of the LA Lakers stadium filled with children. Of course, Christian Bell and Carrie Underwood have put their support on Thorne for social media if you've ever seen them wearing a red X over their hand. And as many people may have reservations of their own about the Trump administration and the Trump family, Ivanka Trump has put much of her time on the Trump administration towards the prosecution of these human traffickers and learning from the victim stories in order to better combat human trafficking going forward. So how can we help? Well, first, quick show of hands. How many people in this room in the past 6 months have contacted their local or state representatives? That's more than I thought. It's important for us to contact these representatives because they work for us. Our taxpayer money goes to them. These are the people who are deciding on and voting for legislation as they see fit. It is free to contact, call, or write your local representative, and it is important for us to do so in order to tell them how we really feel, whether we agree or voted for them or not. We should also discuss and focus on crime reform. It's a little known fact that when I was doing a lot of research on many elected officials who have been running for office, I've found that Phil Murphy has mentioned nowhere on his campaign promises or agendas how to fight and combat human trafficking. Yes, I know that may be a surprise to many who have voted for him in this room, but you can still call Phil Murphy. We can tell them to focus on crime reform and how we handle arrests, prosecutions, and incarceration in the state and even the country. And ending the war on drugs that has gone on for so many years and imprisoned so many people on nonviolent drug offenses would also be very important to freeing up resources that could better be used to combat this horrible institution. Of course, we can also seek out nonprofits like Thorne. If anyone would like, I have this red tape up here as to put a red X over your hand and put it on social media and tag Thorne into it to help raise awareness. And of course, researching the signs to see who is in the life, which is often referred to as people who are in the sex trafficking business. Researching the signs is important because the more we know, the more we can see it. And the more we can see it, the more we can fight it. This is a very dark aspect of the dark industry of crime. And it's really hard to fight something that is almost impossible to see. Any questions?
So, empirically speaking, I know you're saying it's growing, but as a percentage of the population, is it growing? In the sense that, as a percentage of all people living in the world, is there's actually becoming a larger problem as a percentage of human beings who actually exist. In the sense that,
Was there a question in it, or?
Yeah, the question is it a larger percentage of the population that used to? For example, is it growing just kind of linearly with the population, or is it kind of trafficking as a percentage of the population?
Well, see, the monitoring of how many people are trafficked each year is very difficult to determine whether it's exponential or growth, because it's a very hard to find accurate research on this. I know I tried to be as accurate and consistent as possible with my information, but statistics vary so often because our best estimates for how many people are trafficked yearly vary from 800,000 to 4 million. So, yeah, it's hard to. That's just a question that's very hard to answer.
Thank you.
I was curious if you looked at distinctions of the U.S. versus other countries. Because I was thinking there are some, actually this is speaking as someone that did not grow up in this country, things you notice that are sort of different, like a really unusually high poverty rate and a kind of crazy immigration policy. This is all ways of creating a lot of vulnerable people, right? So I'm just curious if you have the sense that it's a bigger problem here than in other sort of countries with similar economic status.
Well, I feel that it is a problem everywhere, but I wanted to focus on New Jersey just because there is so much information about it that it's really hard to keep a cap on it, especially when you only have 10 to 15 minutes. But I know in finding research on New Jersey, I found that New Jersey is also a very popular place for trafficking because there is such easy access to New York, Philadelphia, and Atlantic City. I know this doesn't answer your question exactly on which...
Maybe I could reframe it a little. Like, how much do you think poverty matters for this? Because poverty didn't come up as much, but that seems like that's...
Poverty matters a lot, too, especially in developing countries, especially where they don't have as enforced human rights laws. We see human trafficking more. But even in wealthy countries, and even the state of New Jersey, which is more wealthy than not, it's still popular to abduct people just because a lot of impoverished communities where there aren't security resources that we say we'd have here on Rowan University, it's just easier for them to be targets. So I guess, yes.
Sir, so to what extent do you think that bias plays a role in the amount that we're talking about this?
I think bias plays a very important role in this, considering everyone has an opinion and everyone has their own way of dealing about this. Even though it is a bipartisan issue, there are still debates on how to handle this. Of course, Donald Trump is advocating for a wall at the southern border, which many people don't like, but I would be doing a disservice to this presentation if I didn't say that, as we know of, 70% of all trafficking victims that enter this country come from the southern border.
I have a question. I didn't hear how precisely human trafficking is defined legally within the United States or in New Jersey, or how it's defined. Like, say, the UN might have some commission.
It's the biggest definition you'll hear is modern-day slavery, because in all intents and purposes, it is the act of forcibly taking someone against their will and using them either for sexual exploitation or labor exploitation.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like a very useful definition in terms of, I don't know that police arrest people for enforcing slavery and things like that. Are there more detailed requirements for this? Like, I would think for children, they're not allowed to work anyway, and they're violating lots of laws, like, say, putting children in a sex trade. That seems like something much more substantial than talking about slavery or concepts like that.
Yeah, it is, and you'll find with especially nonprofits like Thorn, a lot of the driving force behind them is to rescue children who are abducted, and so in this country too, we emphasize more with children. But it's just because of how it's viewed globally and how New Jersey still plays an aspect in the global human trafficking trade, it varies from region to region. So we'll see a lot more child sex trafficking problems in America, but in other places it could be men and women more than children.
So earlier in your presentation, you mentioned the need for an enhancement of policing, and I'm wondering if you could kind of elaborate on the changes that you think we need to see happen.
The enhancements to policing that I'm discussing is more community-based, where we see that we build a relationship between the communities and the police officers. I'm not suggesting that we need to arm our police officers more or instill a more police-like state. I'm only suggesting that we need to reconsider the values that we put on our police and how our police are able to act and respond to citizens.
Hi, so do you think that when you said that under the Obama and the Trump administration that this was still going on, do you think is it because they're not making any efforts in prosecuting these human trafficking places, or and also like do they even know where to find these places so that they can stop them and shut these places down?
Well, of course, we don't know where all of these places are, and I wanted to bring up that both President Trump and former President Obama have supported and discussed these legislations, but prosecutions for human trafficking in America is still surprisingly low, and I just feel like that's just because it's not a focal concern of our justice system, and it's not really on many people's agendas in Congress and elsewhere. Thank you.